The sun dipped low behind a jagged horizon, casting long shadows over the cracked earth of dead America. The wasteland stretched endlessly, silent, broken, and still, except for the faint hum of a radio receiver nestled deep within the Forgotten Outpost. The outpost was a rusted relic from a world long gone, an ancient military installation half buried beneath dust and decay. Its once fierce walls now stood scarred and battered, but to those inside, it was sanctuary, a fragile fortress against the horror that roamed outside. Inside the cramped command room, Ava stared at the flickering screen of the radio. Static filled the cramped space, a constant reminder that silence was the norm now. Then, cutting through the white noise, a crackled voice broke through. "Is anyone out there? This is Echo Team, coordinates, West Ridge, repeat, West Ridge. We need help." The voice was weak, distorted, but unmistakably human. Ava's heart pounded as she exchanged glances with the others. For months, the outpost had heard nothing but silence. Radio silence was the new normal. This unexpected signal stirred something buried beneath the dust, hope, or perhaps a trap. Jared, the group's makeshift leader, stepped forward with a grim expression. His eyes scanned the radio receiver as if willing it to give more. "Echo Team," he repeated cautiously. "Is anyone listening? Respond." Static crackled louder, then the voice returned, barely a whisper, "Survivors trapped, undead closing in, West Ridge, hurry." The message cut out abruptly. No one in the room moved for a long moment, the weight of those few words hanging heavy in the stale air. Outside, the wind moaned mournfully, rattling the brittle metal walls of the outpost like a warning. "We can't ignore this," Ava said finally, her voice steady but tense. "If there's anyone alive, we owe it to ourselves to try and find them." "But it could be a trap," warned Marco, the group's scout. He leaned close to the radio, eyes sharp. "The undead are drawn to any sound. That message might be bait." Jared ran a hand through his tangled hair. "Or it could be the last chance for any of us. We don't know what's out there anymore." Outside, the distant groans of the undead echoed, a chilling reminder that their world was never safe. The outpost's rusted gates groaned as the wind shifted, and somewhere beyond, the shambling footsteps of the dead stirred the dust. Ava stepped to the narrow window, peering out at the barren wasteland beyond. The sun was almost gone now, bleeding orange and red across the sky. Darkness would bring new dangers. The undead were more active at night, their senses sharper in the dark. "We'll need a plan," Jared said, turning to the small group clustered around the radio. "We can't just rush into the unknown." "We'll prepare defenses," said Miriam, the medic, gripping a worn rifle close. "And send a scout team to the West Ridge at first light. If there really are survivors, we have to find them before it's too late." The others nodded, tension thick in the cramped room. No one spoke about the risks, the undead, the unknown dangers lurking in the ruins, the possibility of hostile humans. It was survival or death out here, nothing in between. As the last light slipped away, the outpost settled into a fragile quiet, punctuated by the steady hum of the radio. Ava sat by the receiver, replaying the message again and again in her mind. "Echo Team, trapped survivors, undead closing in." What had happened to them? Were they still alive? And could they be trusted? Outside, the first groans grew louder, the dead awakening with the night. Somewhere, the wind carried their hunger, a whisper across the wasteland, relentless and unforgiving. The Forgotten Outpost was no longer just a shelter. It was a beacon in the darkness, a fragile hope in a world gone mad. The fight for survival was just beginning. Let me know if you want me to proceed to part 2 next. The first light of dawn barely pierced the heavy gray sky when the scouting team prepared to leave the outpost. Ava checked her rifle methodically, the weight of the morning settling over her like a thick fog. She glanced at the others. Marco, nimble and sharp-eyed, carried the map and a compass. Layla, the quiet sharpshooter, checked her ammunition with calm precision, and Thomas, the youngest, held a makeshift spear, his hands trembling slightly. They moved out cautiously, the silence of the wasteland pressing in around them. Every step crunched on the cracked earth, every breath drawn in the cold air felt sharp and brittle. The ruins were close now, the skeletal remains of a once thriving town, swallowed by decay and creeping dust. "Stay close," Ava whispered, voice barely audible. "We don't know what we're walking into." The radio crackled faintly in the pack strapped to her back, the voice from the previous night now a ghost in the static. The signal had led them here, but its source remained a mystery. Somewhere in the ruins, trapped survivors called out for help. Or maybe something worse waited. The ruins rose like grave markers against the horizon, crumbling buildings hollowed out by time and neglect. Windows stared blankly, their glass long shattered. Rusted cars lay abandoned, their twisted frames tangled in wild weeds. The silence was thick, unnatural. Marco raised a hand, signaling the group to halt. "Movement up ahead," he murmured. From behind the broken walls, faint shuffling stirred. The unmistakable groan of the undead echoed through the empty streets. One figure staggered into view, skin pale and mottled, clothes tattered. The creature's eyes were glazed and empty, mouth hanging open as it reached out with clawed hands. Layla raised her rifle without hesitation, squeezing the trigger. The shot rang out, sharp and final. The creature collapsed, twitching briefly before going still. "Quiet," Ava said sharply. There could be more. They pressed forward, every sense alert. The ruins seemed to close in, twisting their path. Shadows moved just beyond sight lines, and every corner threatened unseen danger. Then, from behind a collapsed storefront, voices, human voices, cut through the eerie quiet. "Help! Please! Over here!" A man's voice, strained and desperate. Ava motioned for the team to move quickly but carefully toward the sound. The voices led them to a small alleyway, blocked at one end by twisted metal and debris. "Echo team," Ava whispered, recognition dawning. "We found them." Behind the barricade, 3 figures huddled together. They looked worn and broken, faces smeared with grime and exhaustion. One of them, a woman with fierce eyes and a bloodied arm, stepped forward. "Thank God," she gasped. "We thought no one was left." Ava nodded. "We heard your call. We're here to help. But we need to get you back to the outpost before the dead close in." The survivors exchanged wary glances. "We're not alone," the woman said softly. "There's others in the ruins. Not all of them, undead." A cold shiver passed through the group. "What do you mean?" Marco asked. "Bandits," the woman replied. "Humans who've turned to violence to survive. They're worse than the dead." Ava's jaw tightened. The wasteland was already a dangerous place. Hostile humans meant another layer of peril, one they were not prepared for. Suddenly, a harsh shout rang out from deeper in the ruins. "You don't belong here. Leave or die." From the shadows emerged several figures, ragged, armed with scavenged weapons, eyes filled with suspicion and malice. Their presence confirmed the woman's warning. "We don't want trouble," Ava said, raising her hands. "We're just trying to survive." The bandits sneered. "Survival's for the strong," their leader growled. "You're trespassing. This is our territory now." Layla shifted, finger tightening on the trigger of her rifle. Thomas stepped back, fear evident in his eyes. "Stay calm," Ava warned the survivors she had just rescued. "We don't want a fight we can't win." But the tension was breaking like thin ice beneath their feet. The bandits stepped closer, their weapons ready. Behind them, faint moans grew louder, the undead, drawn by the commotion, stirring from their restless hunger. Ava knew they were caught between 2 dangers, the living who wanted them dead and the undead who didn't care if they lived or died. "We need to get out of here," Ava said quietly. "Now." She motioned to her team and the survivors, moving as one toward a narrow side street. The bandits shouted curses and gave chase, weapons raised. Suddenly, a swarm of groans erupted from the alley behind them. The undead were closing in fast. Gunshots echoed, and screams tore through the morning air. Ava's group sprinted, dodging falling rubble and clinging to the edges of crumbling buildings. Behind them, the clash between bandits and undead grew chaotic, no clear victor, just destruction. Breath ragged, hearts pounding, Ava led her team and the survivors through a maze of rubble and shadow, the ruins swallowing them into its ghostly depths. But the worst was far from over. They had found Echo Team, but in the Wastelands of Dead America, safety was just an illusion, and every step forward was a step deeper into the unknown. Let me know when you want Part 3. The outpost's battered gates slammed shut behind the weary group, sealing the fragile sanctuary from the Wasteland's horrors once again. The scavenged survivors, Echo Team, were safe, at least for now. But safety in Dead America was a fragile myth, shattered by every passing moment. Ava stood near the entrance, watching as the others tended to wounds and settled inside the cramped quarters. Her mind churned with questions. Who were these people? And why had they been abandoned in the ruins? The unease in her gut was growing. Jared approached, his face drawn and grim. We need answers. What really happened out there? Echo Team's leader, the woman with the bloodied arm, introduced herself as Riley. She sat heavily against a cracked wall, her eyes burning with exhaustion and something darker, fear, or maybe guilt. We were betrayed, she said finally. By someone we trusted. Ava's eyes narrowed. Who? Riley hesitated, glancing around as if the shadows themselves might be listening. One of our own, turned against us. Left us stranded. Left us to die. A cold silence settled. Betrayal was a poison worse than any bite. We can't afford secrets here, Jared said tightly. If we're going to survive, we have to trust each other. But trust was a currency in short supply. Meanwhile, outside the reinforced walls, the undead began to gather in greater numbers. The groans grew louder, a relentless tide pressing against the outpost's defenses. The survivors hurried to strengthen barricades, fortifying windows and doors with scrap metal and anything they could find. Layla kept a watchful eye, her rifle never far from her hands. Thomas sat quietly, clutching his spear, still shaken from the chaos of the ruins. Inside, tension simmered. As Riley recounted their ordeal, other members of Echo Team exchanged wary glances. The betrayal was a wound too raw to ignore. Then, late that night, a scream shattered the uneasy calm. Ava rushed toward the source, heart hammering. She found Thomas standing over a broken crate, eyes wide with terror. Someone's been stealing our supplies, he whispered. The group gathered, suspicion twisting in the stale air. Food, medicine, ammunition, all precious commodities in the wasteland, had been tampered with, hidden away by an unknown hand. Who would do this? Miriam demanded, stepping forward. We need those supplies to survive. Ava scanned the faces around her, searching for answers. The group was small, too small for secrets to hide easily. Then, the truth emerged. Riley's voice trembled as she confessed. It was me. I hid some of the supplies, to keep them from the others. Shock rippled through the room. Why? Jared demanded. Because I didn't trust them, Riley admitted, eyes shining with desperation. Not all survivors are what they seem. Out there, people do terrible things to survive. The group fell into a bitter silence. The line between friend and enemy blurred in the flickering light. Suddenly, a loud crash came from the outer wall. The undead were attacking, pounding and clawing with relentless fury. Get to your stations. Jared barked. Hold the line. Chaos erupted as the group scrambled to defend the outpost. Shots rang out, mingling with the guttural groans of the undead. Layla's rifle cracked with deadly precision, felling the creatures one by one, but the horde was overwhelming. One section of the wall buckled under the onslaught, wood splintering and metal bending. The dead poured through the breach, and the fight turned desperate. Ava fought fiercely, side by side with Jared and the others, pushing back the invading horde. Amid the chaos, she caught sight of Riley moving suspiciously near the damaged wall. Riley! Ava shouted. What are you doing? Riley froze, eyes darting. I'm trying to help. But something was off. Suddenly, a harsh scream echoed from behind the barricade. Marco stumbled into view, clutching a deep wound. She led some of them in, he gasped. Betrayal cut deeper than any zombie's bite. The survivors forced Riley away and sealed the breach as best they could. Jared's voice was grim. We can't afford another traitor. As the undead retreated into the darkness beyond, the group faced a new and terrifying enemy, one within their own ranks. Ava stared at Riley, a question burning in her mind. How far would someone go to survive? And how many more secrets did this wasteland hold? The night stretched on, filled with tension and suspicion. The Forgotten Outpost was no longer just a refuge, it was a battleground for trust and survival. And in Dead America, betrayal was just another form of death. Would you like me to continue with part 4 now? The sun dipped below the horizon once more, bleeding crimson across the broken skyline. Inside the outpost, tension tightened like a noose around the survivors' throats. Supplies were running dangerously low, and the walls barely held against the endless tide of the undead. Ava paced the dim command room, the weight of leadership heavy on her shoulders. The betrayal had fractured the group's fragile trust, but there was no time for doubts. They had a mission now, a desperate plan to follow the radio signal to its origin, and maybe, just maybe, find safety. We leave at nightfall, Jared announced, voice steady but grim. We can't wait any longer. If we don't reach that location soon, Echo Team's fate will be sealed. Layla checked her rifle again, eyes hard as flint. The undead are more active after dark. This will be the deadliest journey yet. Ava nodded. We'll move fast. Stay quiet. No mistakes. As the sky darkened, the survivors gathered their meager belongings, shadows stretching long across cracked concrete floors. Thomas, still haunted by his first encounter with the wasteland's horrors, gripped his spear tighter, though his hands no longer shook. Outside, the wind whispered through the skeletal remains of trees and shattered buildings. The world had become a graveyard, each step forward a gamble with death. The group slipped through the outpost's side gate, moving under the cloak of darkness like ghosts. The distant groans of the undead pulsed through the night air, a haunting rhythm that urged them forward and warned them back. The wasteland was unforgiving. Jagged rocks and debris littered their path, and every shadow could hide a threat. The survivors moved in tight formation, senses sharp, every sound amplified in the silence. At one point, a sudden rustle in the dry brush sent them diving for cover. Heartbeats thundered in the stillness as a lone zombie stumbled past, oblivious to their presence. They waited, breath held, until it shuffled away, then pressed on. Hours passed, and the radio's faint signal grew stronger, guiding them like a beacon through the darkness. But the closer they came, the more dangerous the journey became. Hold up, Marco whispered suddenly, raising a hand. Ahead, the road was blocked by the skeletal frame of a burned-out bus, overturned and tangled in twisted metal. Beyond it, a low murmur of voices echoed faintly, human voices. Ava signaled to approach cautiously. Stay alert. We don't know who's out there. Layla scanned the shadows, rifle trained on the noise. Slowly, a figure emerged, a man with a scarred face and weary eyes. He raised his hands in peace. We don't want trouble, Ava called out. We're survivors, like you. The man studied them for a long moment before nodding. Name's Garrett. There's a group nearby. Might be the ones sending that signal. Relieved but wary, the survivors followed Garrett through a narrow alley that led deeper into the ruins. The air grew colder, heavy with the scent of decay and rust. They reached a makeshift camp nestled between two collapsed buildings, tents fashioned from tarps and scavenged cloth, fires smoldering weakly. Around the fire sat several weary figures, their eyes reflecting a mix of hope and suspicion. Riley stepped forward, explaining who they were and why they had come. The camp's leader, a grizzled man named Harris, listened silently, then nodded slowly. We've been waiting for help, Harris said. The undead have us trapped, and the bandits keep pressing in. If you're serious about surviving, you'll need more than just guns. Ava's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? We've got a way out, Harris said, voice low. An old military bunker just beyond the ridge. It's stocked with supplies and weapons. But getting there won't be easy. Suddenly, a distant scream shattered the uneasy calm, followed by a chorus of guttural growls. "Undead," Layla said sharply. "They found us." Chaos erupted. The camp's defenders grabbed what weapons they had, hastily preparing for battle. The survivors took up positions, hearts pounding as the first wave of the dead surged forward. Gunfire cracked through the night, flashes of light illuminating snarling faces and grasping hands. Ava moved swiftly, her rifle steady as she covered the group's retreat. "Back to the road," Jared ordered. "We can't get trapped here." The survivors ran, dodging falling debris and the outstretched claws of the undead. Behind them, the camp burned, the fires swallowed by smoke and shadows. As they reached a ridge overlooking the wasteland, the first pale fingers of dawn tinged the sky. The military bunker Harris spoke of lay in the distance, an unspoken promise of hope amid the endless ruins. But the journey was far from over. Exhausted and battered, the survivors faced the bleak reality: Dead America's wasteland was alive with danger, and every step forward demanded courage, trust, and the will to survive. The race against the night was only just beginning. Ready to move on to part 5? The bunker loomed ahead like a relic from another time, half buried in dirt and vines. Its cold steel door, dented and rusted, was the only barrier between the survivors and whatever lay inside. Ava's breath came in shallow gasps, exhaustion and adrenaline mingling as the group approached cautiously. "Stay alert," Ava warned. "This place might hold supplies, but it could also be a trap." Jared pried at the door with a crowbar borrowed from Harris's camp. It groaned loudly, grinding against years of rust and neglect. With a final heave, the door gave way, revealing a dark stairwell leading underground. The survivors exchanged tense glances before descending, flashlights cutting through the thick darkness. The stale air smelled of mildew and old machinery. The faint hum of power hinted at something still functioning below. They entered a cavernous room lined with metal shelves, boxes, crates, and rows of ammunition neatly stacked. The cache was a lifeline, a glimpse of hope in a wasteland that offered little. "Look at this," Layla whispered, pulling open a crate to reveal preserved food and medical supplies. "We're not dead yet." But the relief was short-lived. A sudden noise echoed from deeper within the bunker, a metallic clang followed by shuffling footsteps. The group froze, weapons raised. "Someone else is down here," Marco said, voice low but urgent. They moved carefully toward the sound, senses sharpening as the shadows seemed to close in. In a narrow corridor, a figure emerged, disheveled, gaunt, eyes wild with fear and suspicion. "Who are you?" Ava demanded, leveling her rifle. The stranger raised trembling hands. "Please. I'm not one of them." He introduced himself as Elias, a former soldier who had been trapped in the bunker when the world fell apart. His story was grim, supplies dwindling, isolation driving some in the bunker mad. "Mad?" Jared echoed. Elias nodded. "Not everyone kept their humanity. Some turned violent. Some changed." A chill ran down Ava's spine. Before they could ask more, a low rumble vibrated through the concrete walls. The power flickered, lights sputtering dangerously. "The bunker's failing," Elias said urgently. "We need to leave, now." But the survivors had uncovered something far worse than failing lights. One of the crates, sealed tight and marked with a faded biohazard symbol, had been pried open. Inside, vials of an unknown substance glinted ominously. Layla frowned. "What is this stuff?" Elias's face darkened. "Experiments. The military was working on a cure, or a weapon. No one knows which." Ava's grip tightened on her rifle. The wasteland wasn't just filled with undead and bandits. It held secrets, dangerous ones, that might destroy them all. Suddenly, the sound of distant moans grew louder. The undead had found the bunker's entrance. "Time to move," Ava barked. They hurried back toward the stairs, gathering as many supplies as possible. But as they ascended, the ground trembled violently. Dust and debris rained down, and a section of the ceiling collapsed behind them, sealing the lower levels. Trapped between the encroaching undead outside and the sealed darkness below, the survivors faced a terrifying choice: fight their way through the dead or find another way out. Ava's eyes scanned the bunker's layout displayed on a cracked wall map. A narrow ventilation shaft led away from the main entrance, small, claustrophobic, but possibly their only escape. "We're going through the vents," she decided. No turning back. The group squeezed into the shaft one by one, the metal walls cold and unforgiving against their skin. The crawl was slow and agonizing, every movement echoing loudly in the confined space. At times, the shaft opened briefly into larger rooms filled with abandoned equipment and rusted machinery. Shadows danced, and the distant groans of the undead echoed faintly, a constant reminder of the danger close behind. Thomas faltered halfway through, panic making his breaths ragged. Ava reached back, steadying him with a firm grip. "We're almost there," she whispered. "Stay with me." Finally, the shaft ended at a grate above the ground outside the bunker, concealed by overgrown brush. Ava pushed it open, pulling herself out into the fresh night air. She helped the others climb out one by one. Outside, the wasteland stretched endlessly, silent except for the distant groans and rustling leaves. The survivors paused, catching their breath beneath the cold stars. Their escape had been narrow, their luck thinner still. But the bunker's secrets haunted them, a reminder that the greatest threats were not just the dead, but what humanity had unleashed in its desperation. Ava looked at her weary companions, determination burning in her eyes. "We move toward the ridge," she said. "We find a new safe place. We survive." Because in Dead America, survival was a battle fought on every front. Ready for part 6 when you are. The survivors pressed forward through the endless wasteland, their footsteps muffled by the dust and debris of a world long broken. Every shadow seemed alive, every whisper of wind a warning. The memory of the bunker lingered, secrets buried beneath concrete, and the scent of betrayal still thick in the air. Ava led the group up the ridge, eyes scanning the horizon. The promise of safety felt fragile, like a flickering flame in a storm. But hope, however faint, was a beacon they couldn't ignore. As dawn broke, the ridge revealed an old town, crumbling, silent, but unmistakably a place where people had once lived and fought to survive. "Look there," Jared pointed toward a cluster of buildings, their outlines jagged against the morning sky. "That might be a new outpost." They moved cautiously, aware that other survivors might already claim it, or worse, hostile forces. Approaching the town, they discovered signs of recent activity. Smoked fires, footprints in the dust, and makeshift barricades. The place was alive. "Stay sharp," Ava warned. "We don't know what we're walking into." From the shadows, a figure stepped forward, a young woman with a stern gaze and a rifle slung across her back. "I'm Sarah," she said cautiously. "We've been holding this place against the dead and the bandits." The survivors introduced themselves, explaining their journey and the dangers they'd faced. Sarah's group was small but organized, hardened by months of fighting. They welcomed the newcomers but made it clear, resources were scarce, and trust was earned, not given. Over the next days, the two groups worked together, reinforcing defenses and sharing what little food and water they had. Yet beneath the surface, tension simmered. Stories of betrayal and loss had taught them all to be wary. One evening, as the survivors gathered around a fire, Ava noticed Sarah slipping away toward the edge of town, her movements furtive. Curious and cautious, Ava followed at a distance. In a crumbling building, Sarah met with a shadowy figure, a man whose face was obscured by darkness. They spoke in hushed tones, words Ava couldn't catch, but the urgency in their gestures was clear. Suddenly, a harsh sound shattered the silence, an explosion rocked the town's outskirts, flames licking the sky. "Bandits," Sarah hissed, turning to Ava with a grim expression. "They're here." Chaos erupted. The defenders scrambled to repel the attack, gunfire echoing through broken streets as the bandits pushed in like a ruthless storm. Ava fought alongside her new allies, adrenaline sharpening every sense. But amidst the battle, she spotted something unsettling: Sarah's hesitant glances toward the bandits, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. The fight dragged on, casualties mounting on both sides. When the dust settled, the bandits retreated, but the damage was done. As survivors tended to wounds, Ava confronted Sarah. "Why did you hesitate? What don't you want us to know?" Sarah's mask cracked, revealing fear and regret. "They're connected to my past. I thought I could negotiate, keep us safe. But you led danger to us," Ava said quietly. "We can't afford secrets anymore." The night stretched long, heavy with doubt. The survivors understood the harsh truth: trust was their most precious weapon, and betrayal their deadliest enemy. As Ava looked over the battered town, she knew their fight wasn't just against the dead or the living, it was against the shadows of their own pasts. In Dead America, survival demanded more than strength, it demanded facing the darkness within. Let me know if you want me to continue with Part 7. The town bore the scars of battle: burned-out cars, shattered windows, and barricades splintered by gunfire. The survivors moved cautiously, every step weighed down by exhaustion and the heavy knowledge that safety was still far away. Ava gathered the group inside the largest building, a crumbling old-school-turned makeshift fortress. The walls trembled with every distant groan of the undead and the occasional crackle of gunfire from the outskirts. "We can't hold here forever," Jared said, running a hand through his dust-caked hair. "Supplies are low, and the bandits will be back." Layla checked her rifle and shook her head. "The undead are closing in too. This place will be overrun soon." Ava stared out the cracked window at the dark horizon. "We need a plan. We need to take the fight to them." Thomas, quieter these days but no less determined, nodded. "We take the high ground. The ridge above the town offers a better vantage point. We can set traps, slow them down." The group worked through the night, setting up makeshift defenses, tripwires rigged with noisemakers, barricades reinforced with scavenged metal, and Molotov cocktails made from what little fuel they had. As dawn broke, the first wave arrived. The undead shuffled forward in relentless waves, their groans a terrifying chorus. The survivors held their ground, firing steadily, each shot a prayer for survival. Suddenly, the bandits appeared on the ridge, shadowy figures armed with rifles and makeshift weapons. They moved with brutal efficiency, cutting through the survivors' defenses. Ava shouted orders, rallying her people as the fight spiraled into chaos. In the midst of battle, Sarah's betrayal became clear: she had secretly struck a deal with the bandits, hoping to save her group but risking them all. Ava confronted her in the heat of the fight, and Sarah's remorse was sharp but too late to undo the damage. The survivors fought fiercely, but the odds stacked against them. When the dust finally settled, the town lay in ruins, and many had fallen. With heavy hearts, Ava rallied the remaining survivors. "We're not done yet. We'll find another outpost, another chance to fight back." As they retreated into the wasteland, the sun setting behind them, the survivors knew this was more than a battle, it was a war for the soul of Dead America. Ready for Part 8, the thrilling conclusion? Part 8, Dawn of a New Fight. The wasteland stretched endlessly before them, barren, silent, and unforgiving. The survivors moved like shadows, weary and worn, carrying the weight of loss and the flicker of hope that refused to die. Ava's eyes scanned the horizon, searching for a sign, a shelter, anything that might mean safety. Behind them, the ruins of the last outpost smoldered, ashes of a hard-fought battle, memories of friends lost, and betrayals that cut deeper than any blade. But surrender was not an option. Not yet. "We can't keep running," Ava said quietly as they paused beside a cracked highway. "We have to find a place to make our stand. To build something that lasts." Jared nodded, wiping grime from his face. "Somewhere defensible. Somewhere we can hold." Layla scanned the landscape, tension tightening her jaw. "And somewhere far enough from the bandits." Thomas, clutching his spear, spoke for the first time in hours. "There's an old factory about 20 miles east. Concrete walls, heavy gates. It might be our last chance." The group set off, every step a gamble, every shadow a threat. The undead roamed freely, their groans a constant reminder that death walked beside them. Night fell again, colder and darker than before. The factory emerged through the mist, massive, imposing, its silhouette a fortress against the dark. Inside, the survivors found remnants of a past world, rusted machinery, empty offices, and corridors that echoed with silence. But there was also potential, a chance to reclaim some part of this dead world. They fortified entrances, barricaded windows, and gathered whatever supplies they could find. Each day brought new challenges, raids by undead hordes, the threat of bandits lurking nearby, and the constant gnawing fear of running out of time. Yet amid the struggle, something began to change. The survivors worked together, rebuilding trust and forging bonds stronger than steel. Ava's leadership inspired hope, Jared's steady resolve grounded them, Layla's sharp instincts kept them alive. One evening, as the sun dipped low, the radio crackled to life, a voice, faint but clear. "Any survivors, this is Hope Station. We're gathering safe zones across the region. If you're out there, you're not alone." Ava's heart pounded. A chance at connection, at salvation. "We're not just surviving," she said, voice firm. "We're fighting back. We're building a future." The Forgotten Outpost was no longer just a memory, it was the beginning of something new. A spark of resistance in the Wastelands of Dead America. Because even in the darkest places, hope could not be forgotten. Would you like me to help with any other stories or details?